This video discusses the three different schools of thought, primarily in the fields of linguistics and psychology: structural linguistics and behavioral psychology. In the 1910s and 1950s, the structural or descriptive school of linguistics, with its advocates Leonard Bloomfield, Edward Sapir, Charles Hackett, Charles Fries, and others, prided itself in a rigorous application of scientific observations of human languages. It contends that only publicly observable responses could be subject to investigation. The task of the linguist is to describe human languages and to identify the structural characteristics of those languages. This means that language could be dismantled into small units and that these units could be described scientifically, contrasted, and added up again to form the whole. Research findings show that the prevailing paradigm in linguistic research in the 1940s and 1950s viewed language as a linear, structured system that described grammatical sequences in terms of separate components that could comprise a sentence. These analyses were what Noam Chomsky later called surface structure relationships. According to Chomsky, syntactic structures are not learned but acquired by the child. Linguistic studies have been made to prove that children have innate knowledge of grammar that they could not have learned. Teaching implications. No one may have better manifested structural linguistics in the classroom than Charles Fries, whose structural drills and pattern practices were described in his 1945 book, Teaching and Learning English as a Foreign Language, and in his 1952 book, The Structure of English. The very popular audiolingual method drew many insights from Fries's seminal work.
So here is an example of a repetition drill. I will model the language and then my class will repeat after me. So, this is a cup.
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 The observation of states of consciousness, thinking, concept formation, or the acquisition of knowledge proves unreliable, and thus such topics are impossible to examine in a behavioral framework. Among psychologists, a behavioral paradigm also focused on publicly observable responses. Typical behavioral models were classical and operant conditioning. The classical experiments with Pavlov's dog and Skinner's boxes typify the position that organisms can be conditioned to respond in desired ways, given the correct degree and scheduling of reinforcement. Generative linguistics and cognitive psychology. In the decade of the 1960s, Chomsky's generative transformational linguistics emerged. Chomsky was trying to show that human language cannot be scrutinized simply in terms of observable stimuli and responses. The generative linguist was interested not only in describing language, but also in arriving at an explanatory level of adequacy. In 1916, Ferdinand de Saussure claimed that there was a difference between parole, that is what Skinner observes, and what Chomsky called language performance on the one hand, and langue, that is language competence or our underlying and unobservable language ability. Later, however, descriptive linguists chose largely to ignore langue or language competence and to study parole or language performance. Similarly, cognitive psychologists asserted that meaning, understanding, and knowing were significant data for psychological study. Rather than focusing mechanistically on stimulus-response connections, cognitivists tried to discover psychological principles of organization and functioning. Cognitive psychologists, like generative linguists, sought to discover underlying motivations and deeper structures of human behavior by using a rational approach. Both the structural linguist and the behavioral psychologist were interested in description, in answering what questions about human behavior, objective measurement of behavior in controlled circumstances. The generative linguist and cognitive psychologist were also interested in the what question, but they were far more interested in the why. Like what underlying factors, innate, psychological, social, or environmental circumstances caused a particular behavior in a human being. If you were to observe someone walk into your house, pick up a chair, and fling it through your window, and then walk out, different kinds of questions could be asked. One set of questions would relate to what happened, the physical description of the person, the time of day, the size of the chair, the impact of the chair, and so forth. Another set of questions would ask why the person did what he or she did, what were the person's motives and psychological state, what might have been the cause of the behavior, and so on. The first set of questions is very rigorous and exacting. It allows no flaw, no mistake in measurement, but does it give you ultimate answers? The second set of questions is richer, but obviously riskier. By daring to ask some difficult questions about the unobserved, we may lose some ground, but gain more profound insight about human behavior. Constructivism, a multidisciplinary approach. Jean Piaget and Lev Vygotsky are names often associated with constructivism. A refreshing characteristic of constructivism is its integration of linguistic, psychological, and sociological paradigms. Constructivism has two branches, cognitive constructivism and social constructivism. In the cognitive version of constructivism, emphasis is placed on the importance of learners constructing their own representation of reality. Social constructivism emphasizes the importance of social interaction and cooperative learning in constructing both cognitive and emotional images of reality. According to research findings, constructivism is a school of thought that emphasizes both the learner's role in constructing meaning out of available linguistic input and the importance of social interaction in creating a new linguistic system. Early constructivists like Vygotsky and Piaget actively emphasized their views many decades ago. Teaching implications. As early as the 1970s, some methods advocated the central role of the learner's construction of language, the silent way and community language learning, and the importance of meaningful interaction. The early forms of the notional functional syllabus, which started in the United Kingdom. Vygotsky's zone of proximal development portrays the distance between learners' existing developmental state and their potential development. ZPD describes tasks that a learner has not yet learned, but is capable of learning with appropriate stimuli. It is an important facet of social constructivism because it describes tasks that a child cannot yet do alone, but could do with the assistance of more competent peers or adults. All three of the historical positions described in this video, structural behavioral, generative cognitive, and constructivist, must be seen as important in creating balanced descriptions of second language acquisition. Consider for a moment the analogy of a very high mountain viewed from a distance. From one direction, the mountain may have a sharp peak, easily identified glaciers, and distinctive rock formations. From another direction, however, the same mountain might now appear to have two peaks and different configurations of its slopes, the second peak being formerly hidden from view. From still another direction, yet further characteristics emerge, heretofore unobserved. The study of second language acquisition is very much like the viewing of our mountain. We need multiple tools and vantage points in order to ascertain the whole picture.